Welcome, everyone. Today is November 21st, and this is another of our biweekly working group batch meetings. My name is Maciej, and I'll be your host today. I'm looking at the agenda. We have Akram and Kevin with two topics. So let's start with Akram. I'll stop sharing so that you can pick up your QViz dashboard topic.
Awesome. Can you hear me? Can you everybody hear me?
Yep, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, I was changing the camera and I will just share my screen right now. Okay, and I think we can go with the record button then.
Yeah, I
So,
can see your screen.
okay, it was already recorded? No worries.
Yeah, I already kicked the recording. Go ahead.
Okay, no problem. Thank you for attending, everyone. Today I will present a small contribution that I'm trying to do to the Q project, and this is something that have been asked by many people. Just to give a bit of context, this is just a side project that have been started while I was digging and deep diving into Q, and I was noticing that there was a requirement for having a dashboard. So just for my own testing, I started to develop this dashboard. It's basically it has a backend in Python and the front end into React, and I have contributed it into GitHub. The links are in the discussion in the document attached to the meeting, and if it's not, I will add that after all. So I will just start with a quick overview of the dashboard. So basically, we find in the upper menu the different type of resources that we have in queue. So the resource flavors, the cohorts, cluster queues, local queues, workloads, and a more advanced view, which is the dashboard view that gives an overview of the currently working workload. For each list view, we have a detail. So for example, for the flavor, I have defined here like a default flavor as something we can do for any queue installation. And it will just show which are the nodes that being captured by this flavor and resources used by each cluster queue. Yeah, in terms of reservation, quota and type of resources. Jumping to the cluster queues. So for my demo here, I have defined three cluster queues, and they are attached into the same cohort. They are also all using the default flavor, except one that is using two just for the sake of example. We can see the details again inside. There is all these things related to resource borrowing and things like that. And then there is for every flavor, the resources that getting reserved for the for each cluster queue, and yeah, also the flavor usage as well. Yeah, back to local queues. Here in my example, I was running two sets of local queues, one in one namespace that I called Acrab queue that I will be using for my example, and then the dashboard. What I will just try to show and not use a lot of time is the preemption principle that is happening in queue that being showed by the dashboard. So basically, I will just start with something fresh. So I just deleted my whole jobs, and so I don't have any workload created. And I will create some specific type of jobs. I call that AGI job, and it's using AGI cluster queue. It has a priority of 1, and so it's a low priority. And immediately the pods gets scheduled uh, because the cluster queue that it is using has enough resources. So the reservation here, the nominal quota is 3 milli CPU and 3 megabytes of memory. And right now it's using 3 megabytes, and there is no problem with that. If I create another one, still the same thing happening, still running. And if I create a third one, yeah, same thing. There is no issues with the resources. The only thing is that we are starting to borrow some memory and some CPU from the cluster queues that belong to the same cohort. Then I do have another type of jobs that I create here. It's I call that like an LLM job. It belongs to, I mean, it's using a different queue. It's called an LLM model queue that uses also another cluster queue. It has a higher priority, and as there was borrowing happening, and that the nominal quota uh, for the first cluster queue was overused. If I create another LLM queue, then something will be happening. It's yeah, sorry, I need to create a third one, I think. Yeah, something is happening here. So the jobs here cannot be created, and normally there should be some preemption happening. I don't see that, but maybe like I'm doing something wrong with my demo. But yeah, for the last case, which is like using another type of cluster queue, it's the what I call the cancer queue research job, and this one is using a more aggressive cluster queue that has like preemption enabled for any type of workload from the cohort. And so immediately here we see that something is happening, is that this AGI job that was running here, it will get preempted. And yeah, if I create more jobs as well, this will be happening for another job. So the first workload here gets evicted. It will take a few seconds before the pods that were attached to it will be terminated and disappear. And the same thing happens here for this AGI job. The workload gets evicted in favor of cancer research job, and the pods will disappear in a few seconds because they get yeah, preempted. So now they go to status failed, and they will just like get terminated after that. Yeah, I think this is all I have for my demo. If you have any question, yeah, please proceed.
Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
I've got a couple questions. So, first of all, what's your plan for this dashboard? Would you like to have it merged upstream to Q? Would you like to keep it separated in your repo? What's your take on this?
My take on that is like to benefit the community most of all. So keeping it in my own repository doesn't really make sense. If there is like enough community attraction, that's better to find it to find a place for it in one of the community repos. So that could be under the Kubernetes SIGs in some repo, or even if it makes sense, especially like in terms of coding standards, if you can find a seat on the Q repository, that would be awesome. But yeah, this has been asked on the Slack channel. That will be far beyond like my expectations. Yeah.
Okay,
That would be
so
it.
we would love to have a dashboard in Q, so that fits nicely. And that goes second question. So, what type of support and I mean long-term support could you provide for this? Is it your like just a hobby dashboard, or is it somehow connected to your I don't know work assignment or whatever? So, if assuming that if we accepted it into KubeQ main repository, would you be able to provide long-term support for this one?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, I can spend like right now maybe 20% of my time free without having any issue with my current assignments to maintain it. If the dashboard really get like more attraction from the community, that has to be discussed. But as a sole person and as an individual contributor, yeah, that may be difficult right now without any agreement with my current assignments to be full time on this project. And like being full time, like that would be probably a requirement for having like long term support.
I'm not sure if like being full time is required. So this dashboard looks relatively simple, and that means that it probably won't have 500 customer issues every other month. So that's like a good thing that it is simple. So and if it doesn't work, that's also not end of the world. I'm asking more whether you would feel committed to basically maintaining it and checking it uh, every queue release that it works and to respond to issues and so on. Because that's like the bar that we would like to meet if we accept it to queue repository. That basically this thing gets supported. uh, we don't have, at least on the Google side, we don't have much experience with UI and React. So from the purely UI point of view, someone with more experience there, or any actually, to be honest, is needed for us to support it. And one last question. You mentioned that the backend is written in Python. Would it be possible to switch to Go? For the sake of less language being involved in Q, so that people who contribute to Q could easily also contribute to dashboard and add new functionality, at least on the backend side, if needed. So how much effort would it be, and would you be open to considering it? I'm not saying that it's like a super strong prerequisite, but I would like to ask and check the grounds on that part as well.
Okay. So yeah, based on long-term support, like I just like reiterated that on. Yeah, of course it doesn't. Based on the current usage and the complexity of the project right now, it will not be like full time for sure on that. But in the meanwhile, in the interim, I can answer questions to the community. I can provide bugs. There is also a lot of limitations right now in the. I mean, limitation. It's like missing features, I would say, for sure. Like as there is the requirement of having a dashboard, and there is an empty space right now. If users see something that would be interesting, they may ask. And myself, I know like I can make easily like a dozen of feature requests just to have something like very useful. So yeah, it's I can work on that to improve
I,
it.
that was my question. So that was my previous question. The last question was more about would switching on the backend from Python to Golang would be doable. And
Yeah, that's what be. Yeah, I was coming to that.
okay,
Indeed, yeah, moving to Golang is also doable. Right now, it's using totally open standards, like it's using WebSockets and just like a Python Go client, so Python Kubernetes client. So moving to a Go client with Go would be doable. The front end then is just like React, and it's consuming any uh, WebSocket service that can be provided.
okay, maybe I'll give space to Kevin. Thank
Yeah,
you
I
for.
guess. No, thank you, Akram. So the one thing I'm wondering, like for Q, would we want this as a separate repo in the Kubernetes SIG to kind of not have, like, because I know Q are sort of taking like the experimental approach where like these features are not quite related, but now we'll have, a build with React and other stuff in here. And I'm just wondering, like, do we want to keep with the mono repo of Q? Or I guess the issue is if we create a new repo in the Kubernetes SIG, we have to have a sponsoring SIG for it.
So from the point of view of sponsoring, I think that that's the least problem. Getting sponsorship and creating a repo, it's basically free. We don't pay it out of our own pocket. The question is, what are the benefits of either approaches? So the benefit of having it in the same repo is that we can add unreleased features to the dashboard, right? If we go to separate repository, then having it compiled against the head and so on would be a little bit more problematic, but it's doable. So both options are fine. And when I talk same repo, I'm not necessarily saying same binary. So I guess it will stay separate, but be in the same repo. As for example, QCTL probably will stay in Q repo for the very same reason of easier introduction on not yet released features and stuff like that. KJOP is a separate story. That's a very, very temporary solution. We will have it fixed. But here, I think that both ways are fine to some extent. Maciek, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I would definitely start with, let's stick it with QRepo for start. That will allow us to iterate on it faster. Once we say that, and it's partially related to the second topic that Kevin put on the agenda. Once we decide that, oh, this is good enough, and either we're not going to add additional features or we can have some reasonable supportability around what we want to do and what we don't, then we can consider the topic of, do we want to have a separate repo or not? So yeah, definitely start with have it in queue. It'll be easier, faster to iterate. I honestly don't see any problems with queue repo having, because I assume that the topic of bringing the backend to Golang is on the table. The front end, that could be entirely separate subdirectory within the queue so that it'll be easier to maintain. And then once everyone are happy, yeah, definitely having a separate repo, I'm open to having that discussion in the future.
One more question to Akram. Do you use only resource API for drawing the pages, or do you use, for example, our custom API for getting position in the queue?
No, right now I'm using only resource API to get the information. But I just like learned that you are mentioning another API to get like positions in the queue, and I would be glad to have this kind of thing.
You may want to take a look on how we do it in QCTL, how it is called, and that one might be one reason to consider the switch, because handling Kubernetes API, especially if you go custom, is easier in Go. I'm not sure what does it look like in Python, but in Go, all fancy stuff that we do with custom APIs are supported. Maybe they are in Python. I have no idea. I've never done any Python development, but I could imagine that it's a little bit more complex than we've got, especially if we go to fancy stuff like custom APIs and custom endpoints. Kevin?
Yeah, the other, I think I remember in a Slack thread, I was looking at your code, Akram. One thing we probably want to make sure is that there's no dependency on OpenShift. I know that you're using a lot of OpenShift stuff here just for probably knowing where you are working at. But I think generally for like upstream, we probably want to make it clear that this is not a requirement for OpenShift. I think that's mostly just documentation issues from what I could tell.
Yeah,
And
yeah, go ahead, Marcin. Sorry.
yeah, no, finish the answer. Please go.
Yeah, so I didn't make anything specific to OpenShift in the backend side, neither, of course, in the front end side. As you mentioned, it's like only the build process that I have made for the contributing people to make it easier to build and test the project. So it is only a documentation issue at that point. So like it will be like documenting another way to make it run on a vanilla Kubernetes or any Kubernetes distribution. Yeah, that's there is nothing specific to OpenShift right now, fortunately.
One last question on the license front. So I assume that you will keep it under Apache, and you don't have any strange constraints in your personal contract. You're on Red Hat, right?
Yes,
So you
correct.
can donate this project, and your company is fine with it.
Yeah, that has been discussed like previously right now. So
you have confirmation from your manager, everything is okay on your end.
I will triple check that part and having like a written confirmation. But yeah, Red Hat is a usual contributor for this kind of things. That there shouldn't be any issue for that.
Okay, cool.
And yeah, on the license, I kept on the Apache license right now, so there shouldn't be any problems well to integrate that with the event repository, the queue repository. I mean.
Cool. Thank you for the answers.
Do we have any other questions for Akram? Okay, hearing none, we can jump over to the second topic, which is Kevin with queue release policy.
Yeah, this is more just, I mean, I would probably prefer that we discuss this on the issue, but generally we're kind of running into an interesting problem where, or I'm just trying to understand better, like when do we decide a release is out of support in queue, and how do we, if there's a future where we have much longer term support, like what does that mean for queue releases? Because we're kind of following the Kubernetes release cycle pretty closely, and like eventually, I've seen like we'll drop releases because they were built with an unsupported version of Kubernetes, but I don't think we ever like document this process. And so I'm just trying to better understand, and maybe we definitely should have something in our documentation on this one.
I don't think that we have a solid statement on the discontinuation policy or end of life support. What would be your expectation on that front? Because I think I see that you are concerned. So the question,
Yeah,
what
I
would be
mean,
okay for you?
mine was probably a bit longer than you would like, because for example, 0.9 is built with 1.31, so I would expect 0.9 to be in support until at least 1.31 is out of support. But like that is probably it's a much longer release branches than probably one, but that's at least where I'm coming at. But at least like that's like sort of, I don't know if that is the right approach. I'm just because what Q has been doing, it seems, is the main one, and there's like a previous one, and then usually I don't know if we're cherry picking bug fixes back much further than that.
So far, not, because most of our customers are at the newest release or one that was too behind. So previously, that wasn't a concern. What you're saying would basically mean that we should provide a support for every release for at least a year or two. Well, when is the end of line of 130?
Yeah, I forgot. I actually don't know off the top of my head what our Kubernetes release policy is like. I think it's a year.
So with the cadence of one release every 2-3 months, that would mean that we need to support at least 4-5 releases of Quebec.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I don't know if this is what I want would be reasonable. But that's at least from our side. It makes it easier to rationalize this. The other one, I mean, we could always include with each queue release, like the new Kubernetes version so that we can at least have direct correlation with the Kubernetes release in Q. We already have it kind of in the Go mod, but I don't know.
At least now there is no strict dependency on Kubernetes. So while it may be borrowing some dependencies from it, it's not that Q 0.9 will not work with Kubernetes 29 or whatever. Previously, there was a dependency on scheduling gates being present. There will be some dependency around multi-queue because it will require this managed by field to be present. But these are, I would say, spotty requirements to some extent. However, as I mentioned on KubeCon, we may be coming close to including Kubernetes scheduler in queue for the sake of topology aware scheduling, because we already kind of do pod to node assignment almost. So it would be good to complete this path and introduce scheduler, and instead of checking just resources, maybe check some couple extra constraints as well that are implemented in Kubernetes scheduler, which will make the dependency on the actual Kubernetes a little bit stronger. However, being not 100% matching to the version would not kill the user, basically. Like Kubernetes scheduling constraints don't change with every version. They keep more or less stable for years.
Yeah.
Unless you
Like what I'm just trying to get at is like, so like we released 0.10 for 1.31. And I think that like the APIs, like Q does depend on 1.31 APIs, which I think means we can go all the way down to 1.28 and probably 3 above that. But I think so. And then I guess I don't know, like if we say like if there's an issue with like I'm running 1.31 and I'm running Q, it's built with 1.31 and I'm running on 1.28, and if there's bugs due to that skew, is that supported? And then like because that's kind of where we're you bring the Kubernetes cluster running Q. I have to trying to think through that a little bit, because I know there was an issue.
Probably goes also to OpenShift and the fact that you provide long-term support for OpenShift. And if
Yeah,
you,
but I mean,
then yeah, and of course for general public. I don't have the answer for you right now. Maybe if you could put your strict requirements and preferences in writing, like what would be the something that is absolutely necessary on your end, and what is the preference that I can bump it out from manager also on my side. Because well, one thing is that we say the support, but then who does the work if it's like 4 releases back and some extra coding is needed, right?
Yeah, sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand in Zoom, so I do have a comment when it's my turn, but I can't.
Okay, jump in.
Yeah, feel free.
I was just to say that this, I think as Q is becoming more used and more production, it is time to switch to a more either you need to slow down the Q release cadence so that you only have to support a couple of releases, or you have to buy into more release support. And the good news is Q is being used. The bad news is that now people have expectations about it actually being usable. And so and the version thing, OpenShift has much higher requirements. I don't think we expect the community to do all of that, but if there's a Kubernetes release that's supported, Q should be supported on it, right, by the community. And we're already, we're even so 129 is not out of support to February. I opened an issue a few weeks ago that we run Q 0.9 on Kubernetes 129, and if I don't turn off the visibility by demand feature in Q, I see weird logging behavior, right? And so there's already some version skew happening, and we need to figure out how to deal with that. And that's the good problem, is we're using the system, but the community needs to move to either slowing down our cadence to match Kubernetes to control the number of releases, or buying into supporting more releases, is my opinion. So
I think that definitely we need to provide some commitment on longer term support. Right now it is fog, and users do not know what they can expect. So definitely we need to have something solidify and put in writing on Kube page, like we support it up to X, and what does it actually mean? Like, do we cherry pick features? Probably no. Do we provide security fixes? Absolutely yes. Do we provide like minor bugs fixes? Maybe. And then is the second part, who actually does it. But let's first gather the requirements. Please put in this issue what is your absolutely non-negotiable requirement, and what is like the preference, and we can proceed there. And I will check with my leadership to what extent they are willing to fund long-term support of Q. Definitely, we want to have some, but we may have like slightly different understanding of how long is long.
To provide a little bit more context, I know that Kevin and Martin will be looking at from the perspective employees at the back of their hand, but looking at it from a general community perspective, the requirements is sound, but at the same time, we need to remember and respect the community around how much we can actually do. And once both Kevin and Martin agree to something, I would probably be a little bit of cautious with regards how far back we can put the stretch, and be a little bit of on the conservative side to ensure that the amount of backporting is something that we can manage. I'm fully aware that this will be problematic to a lot of the folks. It'll be problematic to Google. It'll be problematic to Red Hat, and probably a couple other vendors who might be providing LTS. But from community standpoint, it's safer to be a little bit more conservative on this side, rather than state that we support a lot more than we can actually handle. In parallel to that, maybe there should be a discussion around when we want to announce something around Q 1.0 release, and figure out how various versions interact with regards to supportability. Because I'm assuming that anything within like 0.9, and we can provide support for that a little bit longer, but not between like the patch releases for those. And maybe start thinking about what we would like to see as the V1 for Q.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't want to say, hey, I'm wearing my Red Hat hat. This is what I want you to do for Red Hat. I think that we probably should follow what Kubernetes upstream has, because we're offer much longer support than what's available, and I'm not going to expect you to keep release branches out once Kubernetes has dropped them. I think that's unreasonable. I do just want to have a better understanding of like, how far back, like what we technically consider supported with Q, and then what as a community we agree to support, especially, given versioning skew, and, like people don't tend to upgrade even. So that's at least sort of where I'm coming at.
I totally agree, and I agree with Maciek. We want to provide something that, well, is doable and which will stand behind. So if it means free releases, then we follow this, and that's like solid free releases, not best effort, not if we don't have anything other priorities at Google. but we firmly stand behind what we put in writing. That's why I want to have a solid confirmation from my leadership that, well, we will not do features if we have bugs in release n and -1 and -2. That's something that will have to be prioritized and needs to happen, not on some, I don't know, P2 or P3 priority, which basically means never. So from that perspective, I need to know what's your approach to that. What is absolutely needed? Maybe we can provide more, maybe even less. But let's see where you are. What's your take on this? And
Yeah,
yes,
I
we
have the
definitely
posted. We can discuss there. I did write my OpenShift requirements, but we can discuss more. I think we're going to be meeting in the middle anyway. So
Yeah, I mean, honestly, as a user, my expectation is that as Q matures, its release cycle gets closer matched to the Kubernetes release cycle, and you'd support a release, like it would sort of be synchronized closely, have the same kind of lifetime and cadence as Kubernetes does. I get a new release every N months. It's supported for that much longer, and as your feature stability as our feature stability grows, there'll be less of a pressure to have a new release every month or two and then pile all this stuff up. Right? I think that's a piece of it.
I'm not sure if a number of releases makes that much difference. It's rather time. How much of going back in time do we need? Because if we do a release every week, that means that releases don't differ much and cherry picking is easy. Just
Right.
putting it onto extreme a little bit. Yes, there is some tax on each of the releases. However, if there are no conflicts and you don't need to rewrite code or whatever, then that's easy. The problem starts when things do change between releases or between somewhere in between, and you need to rewrite your patch. And that's a little bit independent from the number of releases. Of course, there is some connection and correlation, but not always. Anyway, I'm not sure if we can make much progress at this moment. Let's put it in writing and iterate on the issue that is in the doc and see what can we provide and what's doable. Oliver, you have a hand.
Yes, just to also add a brief comment, one of the questions there is the test matrix, right? Is, how many releases of Q are being tested against how many releases of Kubernetes, right? And I think I would agree with Dave that they need to be a few stable releases, but maybe the in between thing is to indeed, again, like many projects, including OpenShift itself, right? There could be so-called stable release that are in sync with Kubernetes, with the full expectation of supporting everything, as well as, points or, like in between fast releases with, that make it possible to have access to the latest and greatest, but also making very clear that these are not going to be supported, right? These are not going to be supported beyond the life cycle of that particular fast release, essentially, right? And that way you can potentially get the best of both worlds, right? Do have vetted releases, right, that have been actually tested and work right now. And so, people can, elect to be following fast releases. And if they move from fast release to fast release as fast release are being produced, then it will work. But also making very clear that you cannot stay on a fast release, over time, right? So that's also a model that is pretty popular and kind of balances these needs, right? Just my 2 cents.
Okay, cool. I believe Kevin linked the issue. It will be probably the best option for everyone that have opinions to leave their comments in that particular issue, so that whenever folks will be writing this down, I believe Ken will be writing down the policy initially. He doesn't forget about anything. And for now, we have 18 minutes left, and Andre added a topic about serial execution on job set. So go ahead, Andre. Do you need to share your screen?
Yeah, hey everyone. Yeah, maybe we can quickly talk about it. I just, first of all, I just want to say huge congrats on all the talks that you gave in the KubeCon. I think it was amazing. I saw a lot of exciting about Q and job set and batch overall. I think it's great momentum. I think like I would love to see the Q release schedule moving forward, especially how you kind of, provide the long-term support. Happy to help like from our side to see how we can, like make this project more stable. But I think like, on this topic around job set, I I actually checked your talk and I saw some questions around that probably cap would be useful for many use cases, even outside of this, like fine-tuning runtime that we were speaking about. But just to give you an overview, maybe let me just share my screen so we can talk about it quickly. So the rough idea was to extend the startup policy API, because right now JobSet supports the startup policy API, which allows actually us to create API jobs and make sure actually the launcher is ready before we start the workers. And the idea was to, because in API world, you need to make sure that your launcher who actually executes API run command is initialized before all of your workers can be run. But we want to extend this API to allow us to create a sequence of multiple jobs, because usually all of those ML training workloads, they associated with multiple steps. Like you might have model initialization step and the training like dataset initialization step. And usually we want to manage the capacity within the job. We don't want to construct a like complicated pipeline using Argo or Tecton. We just want to, managing those within the single job set entity. And for this, like we want to extend the startup policy API to support not only ready condition, but also the success condition. Like basically you have two jobs. Like the first job is CPU based, which is like initializer. And once this job is succeeded, we want to just jump to the second job, which is actually the training, or maybe an API based training job. So there was a long discussion around like how we want to structure this API. I think there was some ideas that probably we should. So our first idea was to extend the startup policy API to actually allows us to support other statuses, not only success. So sorry, not only ready, but also right now startup policy has this condition like in order or any order, which means like in order, like the jobs will be executed when the previous one is in ready status, and in any order, like the controller basically like create all of them, like no matter like which status this job has. So the initial idea was to also support other statuses like succeeded and ready, and like indicate similar to failure policy, indicate which jobs needs to be in the succeeded or ready condition before we can move on. But the problem with this approach, like it's kind of confuse users, because users basically need to go through all the list of the jobs, and we need to make sure they're going to enumerate them in the startup policy API. That is why we kind of like decided to, not decided, but we kind of like having discussion around changing this API directly on the replicated job level. So maybe introducing the new parameter in the replicated job level called, let me show you some examples here, called wait for previous job status condition. Because basically like the sequence is kind of like apply on every replicated job. This is why having the high level API similar to failure policy maybe might confuse users. Because it's actually easier to read and easier to iterate on from the job set perspective. So the only question and maybe only discussion that we might have, like, what do we think about different API ideas? Like one of the idea was to like introduce the parameter on the replicated job called wait for previous job status before continuing. And here we're just going to add the name of the previous job and the status for the job that we need to wait. Another idea was to, I think somewhere here, just not having the list of the jobs, that basically only allows us to wait for the previous job, not like because like we have a use case, like we have been discussing about the use case when maybe we might have a sequence like this, when I have like initializer, and then we maybe have two like parameter servers which might can be represented as two separate jobs. And in those type of sequence, like we might need to think about how API might look like. But I think like we don't want to support those use cases initially. I think initially we just want to support a simple sequence where we can just like have a like an initializer job, maybe a launcher job, and then maybe the trainer job. But I just want to hear like your perspective. What do you think we should be focused on initially? How we can extend those API moving forward to support more kind of advanced use cases? And what do we think about different ideas of the API design?
So unfortunately, I think most of the people that would approve this are not on this call right now. I
Okay.
think the confusion is the thread is pretty long. I might suggest, like, could you just create like a Google Doc with like the 3 API options you want to propose, and we can kind of maybe agree before like we comment on the thread here? Because like I'm lost on like where the discussion is now on this one, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think we can do that. I
Just
think
like because I think like maybe like pros, cons. I know that Abdullah, like there is, discussion of like what's a breaking change. I know
Yep.
there's also the big focus was on queue in job set, like how the queue can predict the API to decide quota. I think that
Yep.
was the last outstanding item. I don't have a great uh, idea on like what would be easy for queue or what would not be. But like maybe like let's just like highlight what the APIs are, and we can at least like iterate on that in more real time than a GitHub discussion.
Yeah, sure. I think the queue admission really will depend on your discussion with the Argo workflows integration and how you can admit the partially admit the job set, right? Within the within the
All
cluster.
right. Yeah. Thank you for leading this one. It's just a lot of discussion now, and I'm kind of lost on what the thread is, to be honest.
Yeah, no worries. Like we can definitely have different options there and just enumerate them. I think the main point from Abdullah was that we might want to have an API in a way that we're not going to introduce the breaking changes in the future. Because like as I mentioned, right, if you want to support in the future this more kind of complicated use case, like this one, right? This might require for us to think about like how those sequence can be constructed, right? From the
Yeah.
user perspective.
So I mean, the one concern, like, so this fits the training area.
Yep.
What I'm wondering about, like, what I understand, that essentially you want to pull models down so that training can reference those and like all that, and we kind of want to
Yep.
like we're essentially creating an init job to kind
Yep.
of help. And I'm wondering, like, are we going to run into this with serving? Like, will serving kind of have this idea of like I don't, because like we're sort of doing this for post training. I saw an issue today posted about model caching, and they wanted to obviously add in a init container. But I am wondering if this like concept is a bit more broad than just this case. But I was curious, like, if in your view in Kubeflow, what have you seen the solution forward for this?
Yeah, I think we know use case actually for people who are using MPI operator for serving, because they kind of rely on MPI distributed communication to do model inference. I think it's definitely like all the things related to batch can be utilized via job set and using those techniques, right? I think like it really depends on what do you want to achieve. I mean, of course, like probably you don't want to put all of your end-to-end ML pipeline in a single job set. I think this is probably doable, but what will be the benefits, right? Like, does it mean that you kind of like have a cluster which basically have a full entire pipeline within this cluster, but like what actually the benefits user get compared to if they just want to create the workflow from the multiple steps, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm just like kind of wondering for the concept of this, like, are we going to have like, this is for pre-training, and then for like K-serve, there'll be a different approach that people would end up taking. And I know that image volume is another KEP that's being proposed in Kubernetes. And I've been, wondering like if that's like a better long-term approach than like the model initializer.
Yeah. I mean, OCI definitely could be a solution, but you still need to solve a problem with, data management, right? So you probably won't put the whole of your data sets within your image. Like we'll also be thinking about how we can create a data cache, data cache between Spark and training. Like for example, you have a job which is running Spark, then you have your data sitting in maybe in cache, and then you have your training workloads which actually fetching this data directly from Spark rather than going to the way from from Spark to Iceberg, then from Iceberg to PyTorch. So you don't have this kind of intermediate. So similar to like what kind of Ray is doing right now, because Ray is this concept of Plasma object store, where they're basically storing the data in memory before feeding this to the distributed training workloads. So I think we have some ideas how we can actually streamline the like the ML experience and make it faster. I think like we still need to understand like what is the role of job set will be there in terms of those, stitching those two workloads together. But I think initializer, like we can definitely think about how those CPU based step could be utilized, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
yeah, for the on topic for this talk, I think just like having a quick Google Doc focused on like
Yep.
the last steps for this would be helpful. Just I think to kind of get some consensus from the job set maintainers.
Yeah. And we
And
also, yeah, go ahead.
and I would probably try to focus on the problems you have right now, and what you want address, because like there is a little concept of there could be some YAGMI coming up here, or like what we can get everything we want in here, but we also could always improve later on. Like I don't know, like for what you're trying to do, I would like to better understand like what is blocking without this API, and like what do we could put off. It's kind of at least something I always think about with this, because we know we want to avoid being a workflow engine, but a lot of times the discussion it turns into is this too much of a workflow engine? And this is kind of where we are struggling.
Yeah, so I think we have a clear distinguish between workflow engine and what job sets should you, right? Like for example, we will the looping, right? Or like I think on HPC side, right? We discussed this before, but like the sequence, it's like the term which apply for like multiple HPC use cases, right? Like I think Flux and Slurm, they also kind of support the same thing in terms of from the job standpoint, right? So we're just speaking about the sequence. We're not speaking about more kind of complex decks, right? Yeah, and there are also like many things associated with the workflow which we probably don't want to cover here, right? Yeah, but
Yeah.
I see there is a need for HPC for the same functionality as well, right? And similar to like what the questions you got on the KubeCon, that like all of those people, they might have a post-processing job that they want to run after each training, and they probably don't want to use the workflow engine just for this, right? Because they just want a simple job, we just do the post-training processing, right? This also could be useful for such use cases, right? Maybe to report a metrics or do some other like CPU based processing after you finish your training.
Yeah, and like I guess like what I would like to unblock you all on like what you need for Kubeflow, and then if we can extend it as
Yeah.
future, that's probably what I would recommend versus trying to solve every use case with this
that
KEP.
makes sense.
So yeah, at least
Yeah,
there's
because like or now we just use init containers, right? Like basically we use startup policy with some busybox dummy container, and we're using the init containers to fetch model and data set. And the problem with this approach, like init containers cannot be parallelized. So like, right, we cannot run this initialization in parallel. And we cannot switch to to containers. We can, but it still will be like hacky, right? Like we need to have a clear idea of how those jobs can be, can use just a CPU based resources, right, without GPU. But yeah, anyway, let me come up with a Google Doc, and maybe we can discuss different options, and maybe we can come up with some initial ideas and have some initial implementation.
Yeah, thank you, Andre.
All right.
Okay, thanks a lot, Andre. I believe with that we can conclude our today's call. Thank you very much, all. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, all.
See you.
See you. Thanks.